The fluorescent light above the cash register flickered again, casting uneven shadows across the cramped aisles of Chen's corner market. Marcus wiped his hands on his apron and glanced at the toolbox on the counter, knowing he'd have to fix it himself like everything else in this place. The morning sun streamed through windows that needed washing, illuminating dust motes that danced above shelves stocked with an eclectic mix of necessities and whatever he could afford from suppliers willing to work with his tight budget. 80-year-old Lily sat cross-legged on the floor behind the counter, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail as she carefully arranged packets of gum by color. She looked up at her father with eyes that held the same quiet determination he'd once brought to boardrooms in another life, another world that felt like a distant dream now. Marcus smiled at his daughter, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that came with loving someone so completely while knowing you couldn't give them everything they deserved. The store might be small, the profits thin, but it was theirs. Where in the world are you right now as you listen to this story? What time is it where you are? The bell above the door chimed softly, and Marcus straightened his shoulders, ready to greet whoever might walk through. The couple who entered wore clothes that cost more than Marcus made in a month. The woman's heels clicked against the worn linoleum as she surveyed the narrow aisles with barely concealed disdain. Her husband, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed old money, pulled out his phone and began typing furiously, as if being in such a place required immediate documentation for his social circle. "Good morning," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the way they looked at him like he was part of the store's inventory they found lacking. "Can I help you find something?" The woman wrinkled her nose at the modest selection of organic produce he'd carefully arranged that morning. "Is this really the best this neighborhood has to offer?" she asked her husband, not bothering to lower her voice. "I mean, look at this place. How do people actually shop here?" Her husband glanced up from his phone, taking in Marcus's simple polo shirt and the small ladder leaning against shelves that clearly needed restocking. "Some people don't have choices, Patricia," he said with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never questioned where his next meal would come from. "This is probably all they can manage." Marcus felt Lily shift behind the counter, and he knew she was listening to every word. His hands remained steady as he continued organizing receipt tape, but something cold settled in his stomach. Lily emerged from behind the counter, her small hands carrying a box of inventory she'd been helping organize. She moved with the careful precision of a child who'd learned responsibility early, placing each item exactly where it belonged on the lower shelves she could reach. Patricia's eyes followed the little girl's movements with the calculating gaze of someone forming judgments. "Oh my," she said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Richard, look at this poor child. Having to work in a place like this instead of being in school or playing with friends." "It's Saturday," Marcus said quietly, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Richard shook his head with exaggerated pity. "Still, a child shouldn't have to spend her weekends in a struggling business." He looked directly at Marcus now, his voice taking on the patronizing tone of someone delivering unwanted advice. "Maybe it's time to consider what's really best for her future. Some people just aren't cut out for business ownership." The words hung in the air like smoke. Other customers had begun to notice the scene, some pretending to study product labels while clearly listening. Mrs. Rodriguez from the apartment upstairs stood frozen by the bread display, her face flushed with second-hand embarrassment. Marcus felt every eye in the store watching him, waiting to see how he'd respond to being dressed down in front of his own daughter. Marcus knelt beside Lily, his hands gentle as he helped her arrange the last few items. His movements were precise, economical, the kind that spoke of someone who understood systems and efficiency at a level most people never reached. As he worked, his eyes unconsciously scanned the store layout, mentally calculating optimal product placement and customer flow patterns with an expertise that seemed at odds with the humble surroundings. The couple continued their browsing, Patricia holding items with 2 fingers as if they might contaminate her manicured nails. Marcus noticed how Richard's gaze lingered on the inventory management system he'd jerry-rigged behind the counter, the careful spreadsheets and supply chain tracking that kept this small operation running despite razor-thin margins. Years ago, Marcus had walked through flagship stores wearing $1,000 suits, analyzing sight lines and purchase psychology for retail chains that spanned continents. He'd presented quarterly reports to boards of directors, managed budgets that dwarfed the GDP of small countries. The muscle memory remained in how he instinctively positioned products to catch light, how he calculated foot traffic patterns even in this cramped space. But those days belonged to someone else now, buried beneath the weight of choices made to protect the little girl who trusted him completely. The Harvard MBA diploma collecting dust in their apartment upstairs felt like an artifact from another man's life. The door burst open with such force that the bell above it rang like an alarm. Sarah Mitchell, the district business manager, stumbled in with her phone pressed to her ear and panic written across her usually composed face. Her professional blazer was wrinkled, her hair escaping its normally perfect bun. "Marcus, thank God you're open," she said, ending her call with a frustrated jab at the screen. "We have a crisis. The main distribution center just went down completely. Computer systems crashed, backup generators failed, and there's a massive pileup on Highway 95 blocking all alternate routes." Patricia looked up from examining a can of soup with obvious distaste. "What does this have to do with us?" she asked with the irritation of someone whose shopping experience was being interrupted. Sarah's eyes were wide with the kind of stress that came from watching months of planning crumble in real time. Every business in the district is about to run out of inventory. The summer festival starts tomorrow, we're expecting 50,000 visitors, and nobody can get supplies. The economic impact could destroy half the shops on this street. Marcus felt something shift inside him, like tumblers falling into place in a lock he'd kept closed for years. What would you do in a situation like this? Have you ever faced a crisis that seemed impossible to solve? The analytical part of his mind was already working, seeing connections and solutions that existed in the spaces between problems. While Sarah frantically made calls to unresponsive suppliers and Richard muttered about rescheduling their shopping plans, Marcus moved through his store with the quiet precision of someone seeing patterns others missed. His fingers traced along shelves as his mind calculated inventory turnover rates, seasonal demand fluctuations, and supply chain vulnerabilities with an expertise that had once commanded seven-figure salaries. Lily watched her father with the intuitive understanding that children possess, sensing the change in his posture, the way his eyes had sharpened from resigned acceptance to analytical focus. She'd seen glimpses of this version of him before, late at night when he thought she was sleeping, hunched over spreadsheets that looked far more complex than a corner store required. Sarah's voice grew more desperate with each failed call. The festival committee is in full panic mode. Local restaurants are already calling about canceling vendor contracts. This could shut down the entire district for months. Marcus paused at his inventory management system, his eyes scanning columns of data that most small business owners would find overwhelming. But these weren't just numbers to him. They were relationships, networks, alternative pathways through a supply chain maze that he'd navigated at the highest levels. His mind was already mapping solutions, identifying secondary distributors, calculating transportation alternatives, seeing opportunities where others saw only catastrophe. The door chimed again, and Patricia rushed back in with Richard close behind, their earlier arrogance replaced by barely contained panic. Her designer purse swung wildly as she approached the counter where Marcus stood with Lily. "We need your help," Patricia said, the words clearly burning her throat. "Our boutique, we just got word that our entire shipment for the festival is stuck in the distribution mess. 3 months of pre-orders, custom arrangements with European suppliers, everything." Richard's face had gone pale beneath his expensive tan. "We stand to lose everything we've invested in this weekend. The festival was supposed to be our biggest revenue event of the year." Sarah looked up from her phone, hope flickering in her eyes. "Maybe we can all work together on this. Pool resources, find alternative solutions." Patricia's desperation overcame her pride as she looked directly at Marcus for the first time without condescension. "You must know local suppliers, right? People who could help us find inventory, even if it's not exactly what we planned." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The same woman who had questioned Marcus's business acumen and parenting skills now stood before him pleading for salvation. Marcus felt Lily's small hand slip into his, offering silent support as he faced the people who had tried to humiliate him just minutes before. Marcus moved to his computer with the quiet confidence of someone who had navigated far more complex crises than this. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he pulled up databases that most small business owners didn't even know existed. Secondary distributor networks, independent freight companies, specialty suppliers who operated outside the major chains. "Sarah," he said without looking up from the screen, "what's the exact nature of the highway blockage? Miles affected, estimated clearance time, alternate route feasibility?" She blinked, surprised by the precision of his questions. 17-mile stretch, they're saying at least 12 hours, and the alternate routes add 4 hours minimum to any delivery." Marcus nodded, already incorporating those variables into calculations that were forming in his mind. He reached for his phone and dialed a number from memory, his voice taking on a professional tone that none of them had heard before. "Jim? It's Marcus Chen. I know it's been a while, but I need a favor. The festival crisis, yes. Can you reroute 3 of your independent contractors through the northern bypass? I'm sending you a manifest now." Patricia and Richard exchanged confused glances as Marcus continued making calls with the casual authority of someone who clearly understood supply chain logistics at a level that went far beyond running a corner store. Each conversation revealed another layer of expertise they hadn't expected. Within 30 minutes, Marcus had transformed the cramped store into a crisis management center. He'd pulled up spreadsheets that mapped every supplier within a 200-mile radius, cross-referenced with transportation companies, inventory availability, and delivery capabilities. His phone rang constantly as contacts from his previous life returned calls with the respect reserved for someone whose expertise they trusted completely. Sarah watched in amazement as he coordinated a complex network of independent distributors, negotiated emergency pricing, and rerouted shipments with the efficiency of a seasoned logistics executive. This wasn't luck or small-town connections. This was masterful crisis management. Patricia stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, as Marcus casually mentioned universities where he'd lectured on supply chain optimization and Fortune 500 companies where he'd consulted on distribution strategies. Each revelation hit like a physical blow to her earlier assumptions. Richard pulled out his phone and began typing frantically, his face flushing as search results confirmed what they were witnessing. Marcus Chen, former Vice President of Strategic Operations at RetailMax Corporation, Harvard MBA, architect of revolutionary supply chain systems that had saved companies millions. The man they dismissed as a failed small business owner was orchestrating solutions to their crisis with expertise that made their own business credentials look elementary. By late afternoon, delivery trucks began arriving throughout the district, each one a testament to Marcus's extraordinary coordination efforts. The festival vendors who had faced financial ruin that morning now watched their critical supplies being unloaded with precision timing that ensured maximum efficiency and minimum cost. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with grateful calls from business owners who couldn't believe their salvation had come from the quiet man who ran the corner market. The mayor's office wanted to know how the crisis had been resolved so quickly. Regional news outlets were asking for interviews about the miraculous logistics operation that had saved the summer festival. Word spread through the district like wildfire. The janitor from the office building next door stopped by to shake Marcus's hand, remembering how he'd always treated everyone with respect. Mrs. Rodriguez brought homemade tamales, tears in her eyes as she thanked him for saving her restaurant's weekend revenue. Patricia and Richard stood in the corner, their earlier arrogance completely evaporated. They watched Lily beam with pride as person after person praised her father, finally seeing him the way she always had. If this story has touched your heart, let us know where you're listening from around the world. The transformation wasn't just in how others saw Marcus, but in how he was beginning to see himself again. Sarah approached Marcus as the last delivery truck pulled away, her expression mixing professional admiration with genuine curiosity. "I have to ask," she said quietly. "How does someone with your background end up running a corner store? You just saved an entire business district with expertise that Fortune 500 companies pay millions for." Marcus glanced at Lily, who was restocking shelves with the contentment of a child whose world had been validated. The answer came slowly, weighted with years of sacrifice and love. 3 years ago, my ex-wife tried to take Lily away, claiming I worked too much to be a proper father. She had powerful lawyers, family money, connections I couldn't match. His voice grew steadier as he continued. The custody battle would have destroyed us both. So I made a choice. I walked away from the corporate world, liquidated everything I had, and moved here where we could start over. The judge saw a father willing to sacrifice his career for his daughter's stability. Patricia's face had gone white with shame. We had no right, she whispered. Richard cleared his throat, struggling with words that didn't come easily to someone unaccustomed to apology. We misjudged you completely. Your daughter is lucky to have a father who would give up everything for her happiness. The truth hung in the air, transforming everything that had happened that morning into something deeper than simple misunderstanding. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the same store, but everything had changed. The official offer letter from the business district lay open on the counter beside him. District Operations Manager, with a salary that would secure Lily's future while letting him use his skills to help other small businesses thrive. Lily looked up from her homework spread across a table that Patricia and Richard had delivered personally, along with a formal letter of apology and a generous donation to the local school district. The couple had become unexpected advocates, telling everyone who would listen about the remarkable man they'd almost overlooked. Sarah smiled as she watched Marcus consider the offer. You'd be helping dozens of families like yours, she said. Small business owners who just need someone who understands both the big picture and the daily struggles. Marcus felt the weight of possibility settling around him like a comfortable coat. The corner store would always hold special meaning, the place where he'd learned that success wasn't just about climbing corporate ladders. It was about being present for the people who mattered most. He looked at Lily, whose proud smile reflected the certainty of a child who had never doubted her father's worth. The fluorescent light above them glowed steady and warm, no longer flickering, finally fixed by someone who understood that the smallest repairs could illuminate the brightest futures.